In a world where people are quick to judge what others can't do, sometimes the most powerful response isn't words, it's action. When a room full of wealthy investors laughed at a young woman's ambitious plan and wagered she would never succeed, they had no idea they were about to witness something extraordinary. What started as mockery would become one of the most inspiring comebacks in business history. This is the story of how one person's determination turned doubt into triumph, and how she literally did the impossible with her eyes closed. The best part, every word of what you're about to read actually happened. Sarah Martinez had always been different from other kids in her neighborhood. While her friends spent their afternoons watching television or playing video games, she was usually found in her garage, taking apart old radios and computers her father brought home from his job at the electronics repair shop. Her small hands moved with surprising confidence as she sorted through tangled wires and circuit boards, trying to understand how these mysterious machines worked. Her parents worried about her unusual hobby. Other girls her age were interested in dolls, makeup, or sports, but Sarah seemed obsessed with technology. When she was 12, she built her first working radio from scratch using parts she had collected over months. The crackling sound that emerged when she first turned it on was like magic to her ears. She had created something that could pull voices and music from the invisible waves around them. Growing up in a modest household in Phoenix, Arizona, Sarah learned early that if she wanted something, she would have to work for it. Her father, Miguel, worked long hours fixing broken appliances and electronics for barely enough money to support the family. Her mother, Elena, cleaned houses during the day and took care of Sarah and her younger brother in the evenings. Despite their financial struggles, both parents encouraged their daughter's interest in electronics, even though they didn't fully understand it. When Sarah entered high school, she was one of only 3 girls in the advanced electronics class. The other students, mostly boys, initially treated her like she didn't belong. They would whisper jokes about her when she walked into the classroom and act surprised when she knew the answers to complex questions about circuits and programming. But Sarah had learned to ignore the doubt of others. She focused on her work and consistently scored the highest grades in the class. Her electronics teacher, Mr. Johnson, recognized her exceptional talent and became her mentor. He stayed after school to give her additional projects and challenged her with problems that were far beyond the standard curriculum. Under his guidance, Sarah learned advanced programming languages and complex engineering principles that most students wouldn't encounter until college. Mr. Johnson often told her that she had the potential to become one of the great innovators of her generation, but Sarah struggled to believe him. The world around her constantly reminded her that people like her weren't supposed to succeed in technology. During her senior year, Sarah's class took a field trip to a major tech company in Silicon Valley. As they toured the gleaming offices and high-tech laboratories, Sarah felt a mix of excitement and intimidation. The employees they met were mostly men, and almost all of them came from expensive universities and wealthy backgrounds. When the tour guide asked if any students had questions about careers in technology, Sarah raised her hand nervously. She asked about opportunities for people who didn't have connections or family money to support them through expensive college programs. The guide gave a polite but dismissive answer about scholarships and financial aid, but Sarah could tell he didn't really understand her situation. After the tour, she overheard 2 of her classmates joking that she would probably end up working in a factory assembling the devices that other people designed. Their words stung, but they also sparked something inside her. That night, in her hotel room, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She opened her notebook and began writing down an idea that had been growing in her mind for months. She wanted to create a device that would make advanced technology accessible to people who couldn't afford expensive gadgets. Her concept was for a multifunctional device that could serve as a computer, communication tool, and entertainment system, all in one affordable package. The idea seemed impossible to most people, but Sarah had studied enough to know it could work. She understood that the main barriers weren't technical, they were economic and social. The technology industry was controlled by people who designed products for customers just like themselves, wealthy, educated, and connected. Sarah wanted to create something different, something for people like her family and neighbors. When she returned home, Sarah spent every free moment developing her concept. She researched manufacturing costs, studied market trends, and taught herself about business planning. Her parents watched with a mixture of pride and concern as their daughter worked late into the night, surrounded by technical drawings and pages of calculations. They wanted to support her dreams, but they also worried that she was setting herself up for disappointment. Sarah applied to several universities but was rejected by the most prestigious engineering programs. Her grades were excellent, but she lacked the extracurricular activities and connections that admissions committees seemed to value. Instead, she enrolled in the local community college and took business and engineering courses while continuing to work on her invention idea. Many of her high school friends saw this as a failure, but Sarah viewed it as a strategic choice. Community college was affordable, and it gave her flexibility to pursue her own projects. During her time in community college, Sarah built her first prototype in the garage that had been her workshop since childhood. The device was crude and bulky, but it worked. She could send messages, access information, and run simple programs all from one machine that cost less than half the price of comparable products on the market. When she showed it to her electronics teacher, Mr. Johnson was amazed. He encouraged her to enter it in a regional technology competition. The competition was held at a major university and attracted hundreds of participants, mostly from expensive private schools and well-funded programs. Sarah arrived with her prototype in a cardboard box, feeling completely out of place among the polished presentations and professional displays. Other contestants had teams of advisors, expensive equipment, and marketing materials that looked like they came from established companies. When it was Sarah's turn to present, she stood in front of a panel of judges who included successful entrepreneurs, university professors, and venture capital investors. As she explained her invention and demonstrated its capabilities, she could see skepticism in their faces. One judge interrupted to ask about her business experience. Another questioned whether there was actually a market for her product. A third judge seemed more interested in his phone than her presentation. Despite the judge's lukewarm response, Sarah won third place in the competition. It wasn't first place, but it was enough to give her confidence that her idea had merit. More importantly, her story was picked up by a local newspaper reporter who was impressed by her background and determination. The article described her as a local girl with big dreams and included a photo of her working in her garage workshop. The newspaper article changed Sarah's life in ways she never expected. She began receiving emails from people around the country who had read about her invention online. Some were encouragement from people who had overcome similar challenges. Others were from potential customers who wanted to know when her device would be available for purchase. A few were from investors who claimed to be interested in funding her project. Among these messages was one that stood out from the rest. It came from a wealthy technology investor named Richard Blackwood, who had made his fortune in the early days of personal computers. His email was brief but intriguing. He said he had read about her invention and wanted to discuss a potential partnership. He invited her to present her idea to his investment group in Los Angeles. Sarah had never been to Los Angeles and had certainly never presented to professional investors. She spent weeks preparing, creating a detailed business plan, and practicing her presentation until she could deliver it perfectly. She borrowed money from her parents to buy a professional outfit and drove her old Honda Civic the 6 hours to Los Angeles, her prototype carefully secured in the back seat. The address Blackwood had given her led to an impressive office building in a wealthy part of the city. The investment firm occupied an entire floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered stunning views of the city below. Sarah had never been in a place like this before. The furniture looked more expensive than everything her family owned combined. Abstract paintings hung on the walls, and everyone she saw walking through the halls was dressed in clothes that probably cost more than her car. When she was escorted into the conference room where she would make her presentation, Sarah's confidence wavered for the first time in months. The room was dominated by a massive polished table surrounded by leather chairs. 5 men in expensive suits sat waiting for her, all looking skeptical and slightly amused. Richard Blackwood introduced himself and the other investors, but their names and companies meant nothing to Sarah. What she did understand was that these men controlled enormous amounts of money and had the power to make or break startup companies. As Sarah set up her presentation materials, she overheard one of the investors whisper to another that she looked awfully young to be running a technology company. Another commented quietly about her interesting background, a phrase that Sarah instinctively knew was not meant as a compliment. She realized that these men had already made up their minds about her before she had even begun to speak. Despite her nervousness, Sarah launched into her presentation with passion and conviction. She explained the market opportunities she had identified and demonstrated how her device could serve customers that the technology industry had largely ignored. She showed them her prototype and walked them through its features, explaining how she had managed to create something so functional at such a low cost. The investors listened politely, but Sarah could see that they weren't really taking her seriously. They asked a few technical questions that she answered easily, but their body language suggested they were going through the motions rather than genuinely evaluating her proposal. When she finished her presentation, the room fell silent for several uncomfortable seconds. Finally, Richard Blackwood spoke. He complimented Sarah on her enthusiasm and creativity, but then began to list all the reasons why her idea would never succeed in the real world. He talked about manufacturing challenges, distribution problems, and competition from established companies. The other investors nodded along, occasionally adding their own objections. Sarah tried to respond to their concerns, but she could tell they had already decided against her. The meeting that Sarah had hoped would launch her dream instead became an education in how the business world really worked. These investors weren't looking for revolutionary ideas or innovative solutions to real problems. They wanted safe bets that would generate predictable returns. Sarah represented exactly the kind of risk they spent their careers avoiding. Young, inexperienced, from the wrong background, with an idea that challenged the status quo. As the meeting wound down, Sarah gathered her materials and prepared to leave. She tried to maintain her composure, but inside she felt devastated. Months of work and preparation had led to this moment, and it was ending in rejection. Just as she reached the door, Richard Blackwood called her name. When she turned around, he was smiling, but not in a kind way. He told Sarah that he admired her confidence, but that she was obviously in over her head. The technology industry was complicated and competitive, he said, and success required more than just a good idea. It required connections, experience, and most importantly, credibility. These were things that Sarah clearly lacked. His words were delivered with a tone of condescending concern, as if he were doing her a favor by explaining why she would never succeed. The other investors chuckled at Blackwood's comments, and Sarah realized that her failure was providing entertainment for them. She was about to leave when Blackwood made the statement that would change everything. He said that Sarah's confidence was admirable but misguided, and that he was so certain she would fail that he would be willing to bet money on it. In fact, he said with a smirk, he was confident enough to bet $1 million that she would never successfully bring her product to market. The room erupted in laughter at this dramatic gesture. To these wealthy men, $1 million was significant but not devastating. It was the kind of bet they might make on a horse race or a golf game. But Sarah understood that Blackwood wasn't really talking about money. He was making a public statement about her worthlessness and the impossibility of her dreams. He was betting against everything she had worked for and believed in. Sarah stood in the doorway for a moment, feeling the weight of their laughter and judgment. Every instinct told her to leave quietly and try to preserve what remained of her dignity. But something deeper inside her refused to accept this humiliation. These men had dismissed her without really understanding her or her capabilities. They had judged her based on their assumptions about who she was and where she came from. Instead of leaving, Sarah walked back to the conference table and looked directly at Richard Blackwood. In a clear, steady voice, she told him that she accepted his bet. The laughter in the room stopped immediately, replaced by surprised silence. Blackwood looked genuinely shocked that she had taken him seriously. He tried to backtrack, saying that he hadn't meant it literally, but Sarah pressed the issue. She said that she would take his $1 million bet, but with one additional condition. When she proved him wrong and successfully launched her product, she wanted to demonstrate it in front of him and his colleagues. And just to make sure there was no question about her confidence in her abilities, she would perform the demonstration blindfolded. The absurdity of this counter-challenge seemed to delight the investors even more than Blackwood's original bet. They began discussing the logistics of such a wager, treating it like an amusing game. Contracts were drawn up on the spot, with lawyers contacted by phone to ensure everything was legally binding. Within an hour, Sarah had committed herself to what seemed like an impossible challenge. As she drove home that evening, Sarah realized that her life had just taken a dramatic turn. She was no longer simply trying to start a business. She was trying to prove that everything these powerful men believed about success and failure was wrong. The stakes had become much higher than money. She was fighting for her dignity, her dreams, and her right to succeed despite the odds against her. The drive home from Los Angeles felt like the longest 6 hours of Sarah's life. Every mile gave her more time to think about what she had just committed herself to do. The $1 million bet with Richard Blackwood was legally binding, and the blindfolded demonstration requirement made it seem almost impossible to win. But as the initial shock wore off, Sarah began to feel something unexpected: relief. For the first time in her life, she had a clear, unmistakable challenge. There were no vague promises about future opportunities or polite rejections wrapped in encouraging words. Either she would succeed spectacularly, or she would fail completely. The clarity was both terrifying and liberating. When Sarah arrived home, she found her parents waiting up for her in the living room. They had been anxious about her trip to Los Angeles, knowing how much this opportunity meant to her. One look at her face told them that the meeting had not gone as planned. As Sarah explained what had happened, her father's expression grew increasingly worried. He couldn't understand why she had accepted such an impossible challenge. Her mother, Elena, was more direct in her concern. She had spent her entire life watching people from their community work twice as hard for half the recognition that others received automatically. She knew that the world wasn't fair, and she worried that Sarah was setting herself up for a very public failure that could destroy her confidence forever. But even as she expressed these fears, Elena could see the determination in her daughter's eyes that reminded her of Sarah as a child, stubbornly working on broken electronics until she made them work again. Sarah's younger brother, Carlos, was the only family member who seemed excited about the bet. At 15, he saw it as the ultimate challenge, like something from a movie. He couldn't understand why everyone was so worried about the money, since they had never had $1 million to lose anyway. His enthusiasm helped Sarah remember why she had accepted Blackwood's challenge in the first place. It wasn't really about the money. It was about proving that people like them could succeed when given the chance. The next morning, Sarah began the most intense period of work in her life. She converted her bedroom into a secondary workspace and convinced her parents to let her use the living room for additional equipment storage. Every surface in the house became covered with circuit boards, programming manuals, and business planning documents. Her daily routine became a cycle of designing, building, testing, and refining that consumed almost every waking hour. The first major challenge Sarah faced was funding. Creating a market-ready product required materials and equipment that cost far more than her family could afford. Traditional funding sources were closed to her. Banks wouldn't loan money to someone with no collateral or business history, and investors had already made their opinions clear. Sarah had to get creative about finding resources. She started by reaching out to local electronics repair shops, asking if she could buy their old parts and broken equipment at discount prices. Many shop owners were curious about her project and willing to help when they learned about her background. Some even donated materials they couldn't use, impressed by her technical knowledge and determination. Sarah learned to repair and modify equipment that others had considered beyond salvation. Sarah also discovered the power of online communities. She joined forums where electronics enthusiasts shared knowledge and resources. When she posted about her project, being careful not to reveal too many proprietary details, she received offers of help from people around the world. A retired engineer in Germany sent her specialized tools he no longer needed. A college student in Japan shared programming code that saved her weeks of development time. A woman in Canada who had faced similar challenges starting her own business became a regular source of advice and encouragement. These connections reminded Sarah that she wasn't as alone as she had felt in that Los Angeles conference room. There were people everywhere who understood the value of her work and wanted to see her succeed. This network became more than just a source of resources. It became a source of strength that sustained her through the most difficult periods of development. As weeks turned into months, Sarah's prototype evolved from a promising concept into a sophisticated device. She had learned from every test and failure, constantly improving the design and functionality. Her device could now handle multiple tasks simultaneously while maintaining battery life that exceeded competing products. The user interface was intuitive enough for people with limited technical experience, but powerful enough to satisfy advanced users. The most challenging aspect of development was creating the manufacturing process. Sarah needed to find a way to produce her device at scale while keeping costs low enough to make it affordable for her target market. This required understanding supply chains, quality control, and production logistics, areas where she had no formal training or experience. Sarah spent countless hours on the phone with manufacturers, learning about minimum order quantities, production timelines, and quality standards. Many companies refused to work with her because her initial orders would be too small to be profitable for them. Others quoted prices that would make her device too expensive to compete in the market. Sarah began to understand why so many innovative products never made it beyond the prototype stage. Eventually, Sarah found a small manufacturing company in Mexico that was willing to work with her. The owner, Roberto Valdez, had started his own company after working for larger manufacturers for 20 years. He understood the challenges that small innovators faced and was intrigued by Sarah's story. Roberto agreed to produce her initial production run at a price that would allow her to sell the device profitably while keeping it affordable for consumers. Working with Roberto taught Sarah about the human side of manufacturing. She spent 2 weeks at his facility, learning every step of the production process. She worked alongside the assembly line employees, understanding how design decisions affected manufacturing efficiency. This experience helped her refine her product further. making it easier to assemble without sacrificing quality or functionality. During this period, Sarah also had to learn about business operations that had nothing to do with technology. She needed to understand marketing, sales, distribution, customer service, and legal compliance. Each area required knowledge and skills that she had to acquire quickly while continuing to refine her product. The learning curve was steep, but Sarah approached each challenge with the same methodical persistence she had used to master electronics. One of the most difficult lessons Sarah learned was about the importance of intellectual property protection. A lawyer warned her that larger companies might try to copy her innovations once her product became successful. Patent applications were expensive and time-consuming, but essential for protecting her competitive advantages. Sarah had to balance the costs of legal protection against her limited resources, making strategic decisions about which innovations were most important to protect. As her launch date approached, Sarah faced increasing pressure from multiple directions. The legal deadline for her bet with Richard Blackwood was approaching, and she had committed to demonstrating her product Blindfolded in front of his investment group. She also had obligations to Roberto and other suppliers who had invested time and resources in supporting her project. Most importantly, she had pre-orders from customers who were counting on her to deliver the affordable technology solution she had promised. The blindfolded demonstration requirement added a unique challenge to Sarah's preparation. She needed to know her device so thoroughly that she could operate it without visual input. This meant memorizing the exact location of every button, port, and interface element. She practiced for hours each day, gradually increasing the complexity of tasks she could perform while blindfolded. Her family watched in amazement as she learned to navigate her device's entire operating system without looking at the screen. Sarah's intensive practice sessions revealed aspects of her product that she had never considered. Operating the device without vision forced her to pay attention to audio feedback, tactile responses, and logical interface flows that she had taken for granted. These insights led to several last-minute improvements that made the device more accessible for users with visual impairments, a market segment that Sarah had not originally planned to serve but was excited to include. As the demonstration date drew closer, word about Sarah's challenge began to spread through technology industry networks. The story of a young woman betting against wealthy investors while promising to perform blindfolded had the elements of drama that business journalists loved. Articles appeared in trade publications and technology blogs, describing the upcoming showdown between David and Goliath. This attention brought unexpected opportunities and challenges. Several major technology companies reached out to Sarah, claiming they wanted to discuss potential partnerships. Sarah was suspicious of their motivations, wondering if they were genuinely interested in collaboration or if they wanted to understand her innovations well enough to develop competing products. She decided to postpone any partnership discussions until after the demonstration. The media attention also brought criticism from industry insiders who questioned Sarah's credibility and motives. Some commentators suggested that the blindfolded demonstration was a publicity stunt that trivialized serious business competition. Others argued that Sarah was being exploited by investors who were entertaining themselves at her expense. A few technology executives publicly predicted that her product would fail in the marketplace, even if she won the bet. These criticisms stung, but they also motivated Sarah to prove her critics wrong. She had never sought publicity for its own sake. She had accepted Blackwood's challenge because she believed in her product and her right to succeed. The attention her story was receiving meant that her success or failure would be very public, but it also meant that her success could inspire other people who faced similar challenges. In the final weeks before the demonstration, Sarah worked with a new intensity that worried her family and friends. She was sleeping only a few hours each night, surviving on coffee and determination. Her mother tried to convince her to rest, but Sarah felt that every hour of preparation could make the difference between success and failure. She had spent too many months working toward this moment to risk being unprepared. Sarah's prototype had evolved into a production-ready device that exceeded her original specifications in almost every area. It was faster, more reliable, and more user-friendly than she had dared to hope when she first sketched her ideas in that hotel room. Independent testing confirmed that it outperformed competing products that cost twice as much. Sarah knew she had created something truly innovative and valuable. The business plan that supported her product was equally solid. Sarah had identified specific market segments that were underserved by existing technology companies. She had developed relationships with retailers who were eager to carry affordable alternatives to expensive mainstream products. Her marketing strategy focused on demonstrating real value rather than creating artificial demand through hype. Most importantly, Sarah had built a team of supporters who believed in her vision and were committed to making it successful. Roberto and his manufacturing team had become partners rather than just suppliers. The online community that had supported her development had evolved into a network of potential customers and advocates. Even some of her former classmates who had initially doubted her abilities had become enthusiastic supporters after seeing her progress. As the day of the demonstration approached, Sarah felt a complex mixture of confidence and nervousness. She knew that her product was ready and that she had prepared as thoroughly as possible. But she also understood that success would require more than just technical competence. She would be performing in front of people who had already decided she would fail, and she would need to overcome their skepticism while managing her own nerves. The night before the demonstration, Sarah had dinner with her family at their favorite local restaurant. For the first time in months, they talked about things other than her project. Her parents shared stories from their own work, and Carlos told them about his plans for high school. The conversation reminded Sarah that her success or failure would affect more than just her own future. Her family had sacrificed to support her dreams, and her community was watching to see if someone like her could really succeed. As they drove home, Sarah's father told her that he was proud of her, regardless of what happened the next day. He said that watching her work toward her goals had taught him and her mother that they had raised their children to dream bigger than they had ever thought possible. His words meant more to Sarah than any amount of money or recognition could have. Whatever happened in the demonstration, she had already proven to herself and her family that she could compete at the highest levels. That night, Sarah barely slept, but not because of nervousness. She was thinking about all the people who had helped her reach this point and all the people who would benefit if her product succeeded. The blindfolded demonstration had become about more than proving Richard Blackwood wrong. It had become about proving that innovation and determination could overcome prejudice and privilege. Tomorrow, Sarah would find out if that was true. The morning of the demonstration arrived with perfect Los Angeles weather. Clear skies and warm sunshine that seemed to mock Sarah's nervous energy. She had driven down the night before and stayed in a modest hotel near the investment firm's office building. Sleep had been elusive, not because of anxiety about her capabilities, but because of excitement about finally having the chance to prove what she could do. Sarah arrived at the office building 2 hours early, carrying her demonstration materials in the same cardboard box she had used for her original presentation months ago. The security guard in the lobby recognized her from news coverage of a challenge and wished her good luck. His genuine smile and encouragement helped calm her nerves and reminded her that many people were rooting for her success. The conference room where the demonstration would take place had been transformed since Sarah's first visit. Camera crews from 3 technology news outlets had set up equipment to record the event. The massive conference table had been moved aside to create space for Sarah's presentation area. Representatives from major technology companies sat alongside the original investors, creating an audience that was far larger than Sarah had expected. Richard Blackwood seemed less confident than he had during their original meeting. The media attention had turned what he had intended as a private humiliation into a very public test of his judgment. If Sarah succeeded, his reputation as a savvy investor would be seriously damaged, but he maintained his polished composure, greeting Sarah with professional courtesy while making it clear that he still expected her to fail. As Sarah set up her demonstration materials, she noticed several faces in the audience that she hadn't expected to see. Her old electronics teacher, Mr. Rowe Johnson, had flown in from Phoenix to support her. Roberto, her manufacturing partner, sat in the back row with a proud smile on his face. Even her brother Carlos was there, having convinced their parents to let him skip school for this historic moment. Seeing these familiar faces among the sea of skeptical strangers gave Sarah strength and reminded her why she was fighting so hard. The demonstration rules had been agreed upon weeks in advance. Sarah would be blindfolded throughout the entire presentation, which was expected to last 30 minutes. She would need to demonstrate her device's core functionality, show how it solved problems that existing products couldn't address, and prove that it could be manufactured and sold profitably. Independent technology experts would verify that she was truly operating the device without visual assistance and that the device was performing as advertised. At exactly 10 o'clock, Richard Blackwood called for everyone's attention and formally introduced Sarah to the assembled crowd. His introduction was polite but dismissive, emphasizing her youth and inexperience while expressing doubt about her chances of success. As he spoke, Sarah could feel the skepticism in the room like a physical presence. Most of these people had already decided she would fail, and they were here to witness her humiliation rather than her triumph. Sarah stepped forward to the presentation area and picked up the blindfold that had been provided by the independent verification team. The simple black cloth represented everything that made this challenge seem impossible. Operating complex technology required visual feedback, precise coordination, and the ability to respond to unexpected problems. Doing it blindfolded seemed like a parlor trick rather than a serious business demonstration. But Sarah had spent hundreds of hours preparing for exactly this moment. She understood her device so completely that she could feel every button, port, and interface element without looking. She had memorized the audio feedback patterns and learned to interpret the subtle vibrations that indicated different system states. Most importantly, she had designed her device with accessibility in mind, making it intuitive to operate even without visual input. As Sarah tied the blindfold around her eyes, the room fell completely silent. Even the camera crew stopped moving, not wanting to miss a single moment of what was about to happen. Sarah took a deep breath and reached for her device, her fingers immediately finding the power button that would begin the demonstration. The soft startup chime filled the room, and Sarah's journey into the unknown officially began. The first part of Sarah's demonstration focused on basic functionality. With smooth, confident movements, she navigated through her device's operating system, opening applications and switching between different modes of operation. Her fingers moved across the interface with the precision of a concert pianist, never hesitating or searching for controls. To the amazed audience, it looked like she had memorized every pixel of her device's display. Sarah began by showing how her device could function as a communication tool. She composed and sent a text message, initiated a video call, and demonstrated the voice recognition system that allowed hands-free operation. Each function worked flawlessly. And Sarah's commentary explained not just what she was doing, but why her approach was superior to existing solutions. Her device was faster, more reliable, and easier to use than anything currently on the market. The audience's skepticism began to shift toward curiosity as Sarah moved through increasingly complex demonstrations. She showed how her device could seamlessly switch between different applications while maintaining system performance. She demonstrated the multitasking capabilities that allowed users to run several programs simultaneously without experiencing the slowdowns that plagued other devices. Most impressively, she showed how her device could automatically optimize its performance based on user behavior and available resources. As Sarah continued her presentation, Richard Blackwood's expression grew increasingly troubled. He had been so certain that her project would fail that he hadn't seriously considered what would happen if she succeeded. The million-dollar bet that had seemed like easy money was beginning to look like a costly mistake. Other investors in the room were taking notes and whispering among themselves, clearly impressed by what they were seeing. Sarah's demonstration reached its climax when she showed how her device addressed real-world problems that other technology companies had ignored. She connected with her manufacturing partner's facility in Mexico, showing how her device could be used for video conferencing, document sharing, and collaborative work in environments where expensive technology wasn't feasible. She demonstrated educational applications that could bring advanced learning tools to schools with limited budgets. Most powerfully, she showed how her device's accessibility features made it usable by people with disabilities who are often excluded from the digital revolution. Throughout the demonstration, Sarah maintained a running commentary that explained her design decisions and business strategy. She described how her manufacturing approach kept costs low while maintaining quality standards. She outlined her marketing plan that focused on underserved communities and organizations that couldn't afford premium technology products. She presented financial projections that showed how her company could be profitable while keeping prices accessible to average consumers. The independent technology experts who were monitoring the demonstration confirmed that Sarah was indeed operating her device without visual assistance and that all functionality was working as advertised. They tested the device's performance against competing products and found that it exceeded specifications in several key areas while costing significantly less to produce. Their verification eliminated any possibility that Sarah's success was due to trickery or preparation. As the 30-minute demonstration period came to an end, Sarah removed her blindfold and looked out at an audience that had been transformed. The skeptical faces that had greeted her were now filled with amazement and respect. Several people were applauding spontaneously, including some who had initially seemed most doubtful about her chances. The camera crews were capturing every moment, knowing they had witnessed something extraordinary. Richard Blackwood sat stunned in his chair, unable to speak for several long seconds. The bet that he had made so casually had just cost him $1 million. But the financial loss was nothing compared to the damage to his reputation. He had publicly dismissed a brilliant innovator based on his prejudices and assumptions, and now the entire technology industry would know about his mistake. But Sarah's victory was about much more than money or personal vindication. As she looked out at the transformed audience, she realized that she had accomplished something that would have lasting impact beyond her own success. She had proven that innovation could come from unexpected places, and that determination could overcome institutional barriers. Every young person who had been told they weren't smart enough, connected enough, or privileged enough to succeed now had an example that proved otherwise. The questions that followed Sarah's demonstration revealed how completely she had changed the room's perspective. Instead of skeptical challenges to her credibility, she received serious inquiries about manufacturing capacity, distribution partnerships, and licensing opportunities. Major technology companies that had previously ignored her were now eager to explore collaboration possibilities. The same investors who had laughed at her months earlier were asking about funding opportunities for her next projects. Sarah handled these new opportunities with the same careful consideration she had applied to every aspect of her business development. She understood that success in this demonstration was just the beginning of a much longer journey. Building a sustainable business would require the same persistence and strategic thinking that had gotten her to this point. She would need to scale her operations, manage growth, and compete against established companies that would no longer underestimate her capabilities. As the formal demonstration concluded, Sarah was surrounded by reporters, investors, and industry representatives who wanted to learn more about her story and her plans. The girl who had been dismissed as naive and unprepared just months earlier was now being treated as a visionary entrepreneur whose insights could reshape entire market segments. The transformation was both gratifying and overwhelming. In the midst of all the attention, Sarah caught sight of her brother Carlos, who was beaming with pride from the back of the room. Next to him stood Mr. Ed Johnson, her old electronics teacher, who had tears in his eyes as he watched his former student receive the recognition she deserved. These familiar faces reminded Sarah that her success belonged not just to her, but to everyone who had supported and believed in her along the way. Richard Blackwood approached Sarah as the crowd began to disperse. His demeanor was completely different from their previous encounters, respectful, almost humble. He congratulated her on her achievement and formally acknowledged that he had lost their bet. More importantly, he apologized for underestimating her abilities and admitted that his assumptions had been wrong. He offered to pay the $1 million immediately, but Sarah surprised him with her response. Instead of accepting the money, Sarah proposed using it to establish a fund that would support other young entrepreneurs who face similar barriers to success. She wanted the $1 million to help people who had great ideas but lacked the connections and resources to bring them to market. Richard Blackwood agreed immediately, recognizing that this gesture was more powerful than simply taking his money could have been. The media coverage of Sarah's triumph was extensive and overwhelmingly positive. Technology publications that had initially been skeptical wrote glowing reviews of her product and her business acumen. Business schools began using her story as a case study in innovation and entrepreneurship. Most importantly, young people around the world began reaching out to Sarah, telling her that her success had inspired them to pursue their own ambitious goals. As Sarah packed up her demonstration materials in the same cardboard box she had used for months, she reflected on how much had changed since she first walked into this conference room. She was no longer an unknown student with an untested idea. She was now a proven entrepreneur with a successful product and the respect of her industry, but she was still the same person who had learned to build radios in her family's garage, driven by curiosity and determination to create something valuable. The drive home to Phoenix was completely different from her previous trips to Los Angeles. Instead of uncertainty and anxiety, Sarah felt a deep satisfaction that came from achieving something that had seemed impossible. She had not only won the bet and proven her critics wrong, she had opened doors for everyone who came after her. Her success would make it easier for the next young person with big dreams and limited resources to be taken seriously. As Sarah crossed the city limits into Phoenix, she realized that this hometown would always be important to her, but it would no longer define the limits of her possibilities. She had proven that success could come from anywhere, and that the only real barriers were the ones people accepted in their own minds. The girl from the modest neighborhood had become a businesswoman whose innovations would impact people around the world. But even as she celebrated this incredible achievement, Sarah knew that her biggest challenges still lay ahead. Winning the bet had proven that her product worked and that she could compete with anyone. Now she had to prove that she could build and sustain a successful company that would continue to innovate and serve her customers for years to come. The blindfolded demonstration was ending, but Sarah's real journey was just beginning. The weeks following Sarah's triumphant demonstration brought opportunities and challenges that she had never imagined. Her phone rang constantly with calls from reporters, investors, potential partners, and customers who had heard about her revolutionary product. The young woman who had struggled to get anyone to take her seriously now found herself overwhelmed by attention from the very industry that had initially dismissed her. Sarah's first major decision was choosing which opportunities to pursue and which to decline. Investment offers poured in from firms that had previously ignored her, including Richard Blackwood's group, which was eager to repair their relationship after their public misjudgment. Technology giants offered licensing deals that would have made Sarah wealthy overnight but would have given them control over her innovations. Retailers begged for exclusive distribution rights to her device. Instead of jumping at the biggest offers, Sarah took time to carefully evaluate each opportunity against her original goals. She wanted to maintain control over her company's direction and ensure that her products remained accessible to the communities she had originally intended to serve. This meant turning down several lucrative deals that would have required her to raise prices or change her target market. Sarah decided to accept investment from a smaller firm that specialized in supporting women and minority entrepreneurs. The firm's partners understood her vision and were committed to helping her build a sustainable business rather than just maximizing short-term profits. This partnership gave her the capital she needed to scale production, while allowing her to maintain decision-making authority over her company's future. With funding secured, Sarah faced the challenge of rapidly scaling her operations to meet demand. Orders were pouring in faster than her small manufacturing partner in Mexico could fulfill them. Sarah needed to expand production capacity while maintaining the quality standards that had made her products successful. This required finding additional manufacturing partners, training quality control teams, and establishing supply chain relationships with component suppliers around the world. Sarah approached this challenge with the same methodical persistence she had used to develop her original prototype. She visited potential manufacturing facilities across 3 countries, personally inspecting their equipment, meeting their workers, and understanding their capabilities. She refused to work with any company that didn't meet her standards for worker treatment and environmental responsibility, even when this meant higher costs and longer production timelines. The expansion process taught Sarah valuable lessons about international business that no textbook could have provided. She learned to navigate different regulatory environments, cultural expectations, and business practices. She discovered that successful global operations required more than just finding the lowest costs. They required building relationships with partners who shared her commitment to quality and ethical practices. As production ramped up, Sarah also had to build the customer service and support infrastructure that would ensure her customers had positive experiences with her product. She established support centers in multiple time zones, staffed by technicians who understood both the technical aspects of her device and the needs of her diverse customer base. Sarah insisted that customer service representatives be able to provide support in multiple languages and understand the economic constraints that many of her customers faced. The success of Sarah's first product created expectations for innovation that were both exciting and daunting. Technology reviewers praised her device, but immediately began speculating about what she would create next. Customers who loved their current devices wanted to know when upgraded versions would be available. Competitors studied her innovations and began developing their own versions of her key features. Sarah realized that sustainable success would require continuous innovation rather than relying on a single breakthrough product. She began investing heavily in research and development, hiring talented engineers and designers who shared her vision of making advanced technology accessible to everyone. Her R&D team was deliberately diverse, including people from different backgrounds and experiences who could bring unique perspectives to the innovation process. The company's second product launch demonstrated that Sarah's initial success hadn't been a fluke. Her team developed a tablet device that offered capabilities typically found only in expensive professional equipment, but at a price point that made it accessible to students, small businesses, and individual consumers. The device incorporated several innovations that competitors hadn't anticipated, giving Sarah's company a significant technological advantage. But success also brought new types of challenges that Sarah had to learn to navigate. Larger technology companies began viewing her as a competitive threat and started using their resources to try to undermine her business. Some spread rumors about her product's reliability, while others tried to pressure suppliers not to work with her company. A few even filed patent lawsuits claiming that her innovations infringed on their intellectual property rights. Sarah refused to be intimidated by these tactics. She hired experienced legal counsel and fought back against unfounded patent claims. She strengthened her relationships with suppliers by offering longer-term contracts and higher volumes. Most importantly, she focused on continuing to innovate at a pace that made it difficult for competitors to keep up with her technological advances. The patent battles taught Sarah important lessons about the technology industry's darker side. She discovered that large companies often used legal harassment as a competitive weapon. filing lawsuits they didn't expect to win simply to drain smaller competitors' resources and distract them from innovation. Sarah learned to budget for legal expenses as a normal cost of doing business, and built relationships with intellectual property attorneys who specialized in defending innovative companies. As her company grew, Sarah faced the challenge of maintaining the culture and values that had made her initial success possible. She was no longer a solo entrepreneur working out of her garage. She now led a company with hundreds of employees across multiple countries. Keeping everyone focused on the mission of making technology accessible and maintaining high standards for product quality required new types of leadership skills. Sarah approached this challenge by staying closely connected to her company's day-to-day operations rather than becoming an isolated executive. She continued to visit manufacturing facilities regularly, spending time with production workers and quality control teams. She maintained direct communication with customer service representatives, learning about the problems customers were experiencing and the features they wanted to see in future products. Most importantly, Sarah made sure that her company's hiring and promotion practices reflected her commitment to diversity and inclusion. She actively recruited from underrepresented communities and created mentorship programs that helped employees develop their careers within the company. Many of her early employees were people who had been overlooked by other technology companies, but who proved to be exceptional contributors when given the opportunity. The company's workplace culture became a competitive advantage in attracting talent. Engineers and designers who were tired of working for companies that only served wealthy customers were excited to join a company that was trying to democratize access to advanced technology. Sarah's reputation for ethical business practices and commitment to employee development made her company a destination for people who wanted their work to have positive social impact. As Sarah's third year in business approached, her company had become one of the fastest-growing technology firms in the world. Her products were being used in schools, small businesses, and homes across 6 continents. The manufacturing fund she had established with Richard Blackwood's $1 million bet had already helped launch 12 other innovative companies founded by entrepreneurs from underrepresented communities. But Sarah's ambitions extended beyond just building a successful business. She began using her platform and resources to advocate for policies that would make it easier for other entrepreneurs to succeed. She testified before congressional committees about the importance of supporting innovation from diverse sources. She spoke at universities and technology conferences, encouraging young people to pursue careers in science and engineering regardless of their backgrounds. Sarah's advocacy work led to her involvement in several major industry initiatives. She joined the boards of organizations that promoted STEM education in underserved communities. She became a vocal advocate for patent reform that would prevent large companies from using frivolous lawsuits to stifle innovation. She supported funding for research programs at historically black colleges and universities and Hispanic-serving institutions. The recognition that came with Sarah's business success and advocacy work included numerous awards and honors. She was named to lists of the most influential people in technology and received honorary degrees from several universities. Major business magazines featured her on their covers, and her story was being developed into a documentary film that would inspire other entrepreneurs. But the recognition that meant the most to Sarah came from the people whose lives had been changed by her work. Teachers wrote to tell her how her affordable devices had transformed their classrooms. Small business owners explained how her products had allowed them to compete with larger companies. Students from low-income families described how access to advanced technology had opened up educational and career opportunities they had never thought possible. Sarah's hometown of Phoenix had become a pilgrimage destination for entrepreneurs and technology enthusiasts who wanted to see where her journey had begun. The garage where she had built her first prototype was now marked with a plaque, and the community college where she had taken her early business courses offered a scholarship program named in her honor.
Her success had brought investment and attention to her community, creating opportunities for other local entrepreneurs.
As her company prepared for its initial public offering, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since that first humiliating meeting with Richard Blackwood and his investors.
The young woman who had been told she would never succeed was now leading a company valued at billions of dollars. The device she had developed in her bedroom had evolved into a product line that was reshaping entire market segments. But Sarah was most proud of the changes her success had created for other people. The barriers that had seemed insurmountable when she started her journey were now being overcome by a new generation of entrepreneurs who had been inspired by her example. Young people who might have given up on their dreams after facing rejection were instead persisting and finding ways to succeed. The $1 million bet that Richard Blackwood had intended as a humiliation had become the catalyst for a transformation that extended far beyond Sarah's personal success. Her blindfolded demonstration had proven that innovation and determination could overcome prejudice and privilege, But her subsequent achievements had shown that success could be sustained and scaled to create positive change for countless other people. As Sarah looked toward the future, she saw opportunities and challenges that would require the same persistence and strategic thinking that had brought her this far. The technology industry was evolving rapidly, and maintaining her competitive advantage would require continuous innovation and adaptation. New competitors were emerging, and established companies had learned not to underestimate entrepreneurs like her. But Sarah faced these challenges with confidence earned through years of proving skeptics wrong and overcoming obstacles that had seemed impossible. She had built a company that could compete with anyone, and a team that shared her commitment to making advanced technology accessible to everyone. Most importantly, she had demonstrated that success could come from anywhere, and that the only real limitations were the ones people accepted in their own minds. The girl from Phoenix, who had once been dismissed as naive and unprepared, had become a business leader whose innovations were changing the world. But she was still driven by the same curiosity and determination that had motivated her to take apart broken electronics in her family's garage. The Blindfolded demonstration was now history, but Sarah's vision of a more inclusive and accessible technology future was just beginning to be realized. 5 years after the Blindfolded demonstration that changed everything, Sarah Martinez stood before the largest technology conference in the world as its keynote speaker. The same industry that had once dismissed her now hung on every word as she outlined her vision for the future of accessible technology. The journey from her family's garage to this moment had been extraordinary, but Sarah knew that her most important work still lay ahead. The company Sarah had built was no longer just successful. It had become a force for transformation throughout the technology industry. Her products were being used by over 50 million people worldwide, from students in rural schools to entrepreneurs in developing countries who had never before had access to advanced computing tools. The ripple effects of her innovations extended far beyond her own company's products, inspiring competitors to reconsider their own approaches to accessibility and affordability. Sarah's influence on the industry went deeper than just the products her company produced. The hiring practices she had pioneered were being adopted by other technology firms who realized that diverse teams produced more innovative solutions. The manufacturing standards she had insisted upon were becoming industry benchmarks for ethical production. The patent reform initiatives she had supported were making it easier for new entrepreneurs to enter the market without fear of legal harassment from established companies. But perhaps the most significant aspect of Sarah's legacy was the generation of entrepreneurs she had inspired. The fund she had established with Richard Blackwood's $1 million bet had grown into a major source of support for innovative startups founded by women, minorities, and people from economically disadvantaged backgrounds. Dozens of companies that might never have existed were now thriving, creating thousands of jobs and developing solutions to problems that traditional technology companies had ignored. Sarah's story had been told and retold in countless articles, books, and presentations, but she remained focused on the practical work of building and improving her business rather than dwelling on past achievements. Her company's research and development efforts continued to produce breakthrough innovations that pushed the boundaries of what was possible at accessible price points. Her latest product line included devices that could provide internet access in areas without traditional infrastructure, opening up educational and economic opportunities for millions of people. The challenges Sarah faced as an established business leader were different from those she had encountered as a struggling entrepreneur, but they were equally demanding. Managing a global company with thousands of employees required skills and knowledge that she continued to develop through experience and mentorship from other successful executives. The decisions she made now affected not just her own future, but the livelihoods of her employees and the communities that depended on her products. Competition in the technology industry had intensified as other companies recognized the value of the market segments Sarah had pioneered. Major corporations that had initially ignored her target customers were now developing their own affordable product lines, using their vast resources to try to replicate her success. Sarah had to constantly innovate and improve her offerings to maintain her competitive advantages while staying true to her mission of accessibility. The financial success of Sarah's company had made her one of the wealthiest individuals in the technology industry, but she approached her fortune with the same values that had guided her business decisions from the beginning. She lived modestly, continued to drive the same Honda Civic she had owned as a college student, and invested most of her wealth in philanthropic initiatives that supported education, entrepreneurship, and community development. Sarah's philanthropic work focused on creating opportunities for people who faced the same barriers she had encountered at the start of her career. She funded scholarship programs at community colleges and historically black colleges and universities, providing not just tuition assistance, but also mentorship and internship opportunities. She supported makerspaces and technical education programs in underserved communities, giving young people access to the tools and knowledge they needed to pursue careers in science and technology. One of Sarah's most ambitious philanthropic initiatives was the establishment of innovation centers in economically disadvantaged areas around the world. These centers provided access to advanced technology, technical training, and business development support for local entrepreneurs who had innovative ideas but lacked resources to develop them. The centers were designed to be sustainable, generating revenue through the successful businesses they helped create while continuing to support new entrepreneurs. The innovation centers had already produced remarkable success stories. A young man in Kenya had developed a solar-powered water purification system that was now providing clean drinking water to thousands of people. A woman in rural Mexico had created a mobile application that connected small farmers directly with urban markets, eliminating exploitative middlemen and increasing farmer incomes. A group of students in inner-city Detroit had developed educational software that was helping children in low-performing schools catch up with their peers. These success stories validated Sarah's belief that innovation could emerge from anywhere when people had access to the right tools and support. Each new entrepreneur who succeeded made it easier for others to believe in their own potential and pursue their own ambitious goals. The network of innovation centers was creating a global community of entrepreneurs who supported and learned from each other. Sarah's influence extended into policy circles as well, where her voice carried weight with lawmakers and regulators who were grappling with the challenges of technological change. She testified regularly before congressional committees, advocating for policies that would promote innovation while protecting consumer interests. Her recommendations were based on practical experience rather than theoretical principles, making them particularly valuable to policymakers. One of Sarah's most significant policy achievements was her role in reforming patent laws that had been used to stifle innovation by small companies. Working with other entrepreneurs and policy experts, she helped design new regulations that made it more difficult for large corporations to file frivolous patent lawsuits against smaller competitors. These reforms had already led to increased entrepreneurial activity and more rapid innovation across the technology industry. Sarah also became a leading advocate for digital equity policies that ensured underserved communities had access to high-speed internet and modern computing tools. She argued that access to technology was becoming as essential as access to electricity or clean water, and that government policies should reflect this reality. Her advocacy contributed to major federal investments in broadband infrastructure and digital literacy programs. As her company approached its 10th anniversary, Sarah began planning for the long-term sustainability of her mission beyond her own leadership. She had built strong management teams and established cultural values that would guide the company's future decisions, but she wanted to ensure that her commitment to accessibility and inclusion would survive changes in leadership and market conditions.
Sarah's solution was to establish a governance structure that formally enshrined her company's social mission alongside its business objectives.
She worked with legal experts to create a new type of corporate structure that required the company to consider the impact of its decisions on customers, employees, communities, and society as a whole, not just shareholders. This structure made it legally difficult for future leaders to abandon the company's commitment to accessible technology. The governance innovation attracted attention from other companies and organizations that were struggling to balance profit motives with social responsibility. Sarah's model was studied by business schools and adopted by other entrepreneurs who wanted to build sustainable enterprises that served broader social purposes. The structure became a new standard for companies that wanted to demonstrate authentic commitment to social impact. Sarah's personal life had also evolved during her years of business success, though she remained relatively private about her relationships and family plans. She had married Roberto, her original manufacturing partner, in a small ceremony attended by family and close friends. Their relationship had grown from professional collaboration to deep personal partnership based on shared values and complementary skills that strengthened both their business and personal lives. The couple had 2 young children who were growing up with a very different understanding of possibility than Sarah had experienced as a child. They saw technology as a creative tool rather than a mysterious barrier, and they were encouraged to explore their interests without regard for traditional gender roles or social expectations. Sarah was determined that her children would have every opportunity to pursue their dreams while understanding their responsibility to use their advantages to help others. Sarah often reflected on how different her life might have been if Richard Blackwood and his colleagues had taken her seriously during that first meeting instead of dismissing her with their $1 million bet. She might have become successful more quickly and with less stress, but she also might not have developed the resilience and determination that had made her achievements so meaningful. The obstacles she had overcome had taught her valuable lessons, that she now shared with other entrepreneurs facing similar challenges. The relationship between Sarah and Richard Blackwood had evolved into something approaching friendship over the years since their famous bet. Blackwood had become one of her company's most vocal supporters and had used his influence to help other entrepreneurs who reminded him of Sarah's early potential. He often spoke publicly about the importance of recognizing talent, regardless of its source, and the dangers of making assumptions based on superficial characteristics. Blackwood had also become a major contributor to Sarah's philanthropic initiatives, viewing his support as partial atonement for his initial misjudgment. He frequently told colleagues that his million-dollar bet against Sarah had been the most expensive lesson of his career, but also the most valuable. His transformation from skeptic to supporter had become its own inspiring story about the possibility of personal growth and redemption. As Sarah looked toward the future, she saw challenges and opportunities that would require new types of innovation and leadership. Climate change was creating urgent needs for sustainable technology solutions. Artificial intelligence was raising questions about the future of work and human dignity. Growing inequality was threatening the social stability that made innovation possible. Sarah believed that these challenges could be addressed through the same principles that had guided her business success: inclusive innovation, ethical leadership, and commitment to serving the needs of all people, rather than just the privileged few. She was already working on new products and initiatives that would address these emerging challenges, while staying true to her core mission of making advanced technology accessible to everyone. The woman who had once been told she would never succeed was now planning for a legacy that would extend far beyond her own lifetime. Through her company, her philanthropic work, and her influence on industry practices, Sarah had created systems and institutions that would continue to create opportunities for others long after her own career ended. The blindfolded demonstration that had launched her journey was now remembered as a symbolic moment when determination triumphed over prejudice and opened new possibilities for countless others. Sarah's story had become more than just a business success tale. It had become a template for social change through entrepreneurship. Young people around the world studied her journey and saw possibilities for their own lives that previous generations could not have imagined. The barriers that had once seemed insurmountable were now being overcome regularly by people who had learned from Sarah's example that persistence and innovation could overcome any obstacle. The garage in Phoenix where Sarah had built her first prototype had been preserved as a museum and educational center that inspired thousands of visitors each year. Students came on field trips to learn about innovation and entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurs traveled from around the world to see where one person's determination had changed an entire industry. The simple workspace where Sarah had once struggled with broken electronics had become a shrine to the power of human potential. But Sarah herself remained focused on the future rather than the past. The challenges that had driven her to accept Richard Blackwood's impossible bet continued to motivate her work every day. As long as there were people who lacked access to the tools and opportunities they needed to reach their potential, Sarah's mission would continue. The blindfolded demonstration had ended, but the vision it represented would guide her work for the rest of her life. The young woman who had once bet everything on her ability to prove skeptics wrong had become a leader whose success was measured not just in profits or recognition, but in the opportunities she had created for others. Her legacy would be written not just in the history of business innovation, but in the lives of countless people who had been inspired to pursue their own impossible dreams and make them reality.